Thanks again for joining us. We're excited to talk to you. We have a great opportunity and privilege to talk to you about some new things in cloud governance, some new features and things that we've built to enable you to govern your accounts more effectively. So by way of introduction, my name's Tim Honeychurch. I'm a principal specialist in cloud governance worldwide, working with our customers and our service teams on designing and implementing governance best practices.
Hello all, can you all hear me okay? Perfect. I am Naveen Ravishankar. I'm a product manager in AWS organizations. I am specifically focused on policies. I'm super excited to talk to you about a few policies that we have recently launched.
We're good to go now. So as we get started, I want to make a point of emphasis and ask you to think about something as we go through the content. In my introduction, I mentioned the concept of governance best practices and working with our customers. And as we go through this today, we're going to be talking about some very specific new capabilities in governance. And what we'll ask is that as we go through it, you be thinking about how you might be applying these in your own context, in your own situation to meet your own needs and business objectives. So it's a very practical set of content, and we're hoping that you can see some applicability in what you do. For a quick agenda, we're going to spend a minute just baselining a definition of what cloud governance is. I'm sure we all have an opinion on that, but we want to make sure we're on the same page. And then Naveen is going to take us through a couple of new capabilities in control policies. And then I'm going to spend a minute talking about some new developments in our observability tooling and how that relates to helping you build stronger governance. All right, quick definition. To us, we look at AWS, we look at cloud governance as a way to align your use of the AWS cloud with the business outcomes that you're looking for, right? You came to us for specific reasons, and we want to make sure that the way you're using the cloud aligns to those. And we'll get into that more as we go. We do see cloud governance, and I'm a little bit biased, right, because this is what I do, but we see it in kind of a missional sort of a way. Right? There's a handful of things that we really value and emphasize in that mission. The first is to move fast towards your business objectives, right? What we don't want is you coming to AWS Cloud and then spinning your wheels while you try to get things going, right? We want to enable you to move quickly to achieve those objectives. Next, we want you to do that in a very secure and compliant way, and I'm sure that's why you're here, because you agree with that. And third, we want to emphasize and enable you with efficiency in doing those things. Efficiency is key, and we'll drill into that a bit more. But we also realize in governance that it's very challenging, right? And again, as we think through the theme of today and what's new, we want to think about what we're launching and designing and implementing for you to help you overcome some challenges. So let's take a look at what those challenges are. The first is balancing this idea of innovation, moving quickly, with controls, right? We can be extreme one end or the other, but we want to balance those so that we can have good innovation while also maintaining a minimal amount of risk and enabling effective controls. Regulation, right? Who here has to deal with compliance and regulation? Just about everybody, right? And it's an ever-increasing demand, it's an ever-increasing challenge. And when we think about efficiency, the time it takes to stay compliant and report on compliance is a challenge, right? And we seek to address that in what we do. Agility. Now, we've been talking about speed to business objectives, but let's be specific about software development life cycles and the ability for your developers to stay agile in what they do. We want to be able to grant the developers access to the things that they need to move quickly in their sprints while maintaining control. Cost consciousness, right? I had the opportunity to be an AWS customer for many years. And a lot of these challenges I was right in the middle of, right? I worked with our SRE teams, our development teams, our product management teams. It was a security ISV, so we had a very strong security team. And also the finance team, right? Each of them had competing needs. They're all stakeholders, and being able to manage all of those is part of the tricky balance. I still have the occasional nightmare about my public company CFO asking me, how do we prevent this being like open-ended spending and just letting developers run rogue, right? That's where governance comes in. And then we mentioned efficiency, right? So who here has a surplus of tooling budgets and headcount to help manage all of this governance? Don't see any hands raised there. In fact, it's usually going the opposite direction. So pay close attention to this one as well, as Naveen describes some of these new control policies, because we need to be able to enable you to do these things at the most efficient way. All right, because we're AWS and we're customer obsessed, we love to tell customer success stories. And by the way, that's one of the reasons I ask you to think about how you can apply some of these things in your own world, because I want to hear about future success stories, right? So one customer of ours, Clearwater Analytics, recently shared a blog with us. There's a QR code there if you would like to read the full blog. That described the set of challenges and priorities that they had, right, from a cloud perspective, and what they did about it and what the outcomes were, right? For them, they were growing so quickly that they needed to take advantage of the scalability of the AWS cloud to match their organization's growth, right? And they needed to do that with a very small team and build automation. These were top priorities for them, right? They came in and, amongst other things, applied some of the tools and services that we'll be talking about today. In this case, AWS organizations, control tower, and then control policies. The outcome for them is that that small team was able to handle 200% more resources, and they were able to provide that independence to their developers. And they described that as the feeling of having a safety net to enable them to move quickly to what they were trying to do. So with that as a background and a kind of setting the stage in terms of governance, I'm going to ask Naveen to come up and talk about some of the new things that we've recently released in governance.
Okay, thanks Tim for the governance overview. I hope you folks can still hear me okay? Okay, great. So now we're going to get into the details of two impactful policies, both released this year. In fact, one of the policies released just in time for reInvent on December 1st. But before we get into these policies, I first want to talk about the services that you all use to create and manage these policies. So let's start with AWS organizations and AWS Control Tower. If you are a multi-account customer, you have multiple accounts in your environment, and you have a need to govern across these accounts, then you're most likely already using AWS organizations or Control Tower. I just want to understand the audience over here. So if you're already actively using these services, can you raise your hand? That's great. I love it. Perfect. So most of you are already customers, so you'll understand the policies and the impact of these policies. Okay, so this is a 300 level course, and most of you folks already know these services. So I'm not going to go into the details of these services, but what I will do is touch upon the relevant topics with respect to policies and controls on these services. Okay, let's start with AWS organizations. AWS organizations is one of the foundational services in AWS in governance, with which you can centrally govern multiple accounts using policies. And AWS Control Tower is built on AWS organizations and a few other foundational governance services. If you want to quickly and easily set up a multi-account, well-architected environment in less than 30 minutes, then AWS Control Tower is the best choice for it. We also love AWS Control Tower because it has more than 500 plus pre-configured managed controls. This is super impactful, and you all really love it. Customers really love it, because you can now out of the box deploy these policies and these controls and secure your environments. Let's talk about AWS organization policies. So broadly, we have two categories of policies in AWS organizations. We have the authorization policy, and we have the management policy. Again, quick show of hands, how many of you here actively use management policies? Okay, sounds good. So let's speak about what are the values of these policies first. If your intent is to manage access of IAM principals or resources, then you would be using your authorization policy. Versus if your intent is to manage configuration of services, then you would be using a management policy. Now, most people who use policies probably know about service control policies. It's a very customer popular policy. Service control policies are used to control access of IAM principals in your environment. And we've been offering that for several years now. In the management policy side, up until earlier this year, we are offering 3 policies. Backup policies to configure your backups, tag policies to configure your tags, and then AI opt-out policies to, for you to share if AWS AI services can use your data or not. In October of 2024, we started supporting chatbot policies. If in your organization you use chatbots to interact with AWS resources, I would highly, highly recommend that you try it out. We've had excellent customer feedback on this policy so far. Now, in November of 2024, we launched resource control policy. This is a super impactful policy. I'm excited to get into the details of it. We will cover more of this in the session. But at a very high level, what SCPs do for principals, resource control policies do for resources. And just in time for reInvent, we launched declarative policies for EC2, and we're going to dive into the details of declarative policies now. Okay, so as we were thinking about declarative policies, let's get into what you all asked for that influenced us into building this new policy. I'm talking about declarative policy. So there was a need from customers to enforce uniform configuration. This can be a single baseline across accounts or multiple baselines and accounts. So imagine you want to define configuration for accounts in your organization, which is what I call as baselines. Next, if you think about the security persona in the organization, there was a question asked for peace of mind, and what they actually asked for was when they enforce a configuration, they wanted to make sure that, when they define the configuration, they wanted to make sure that the configuration is always maintained and always enforced. Meaning you don't want your account level admins to be changing this configuration and constantly worrying about not having this configuration which you implemented maintained. And third was applying these configuration at scale. Some of you here have multiple accounts, thousands of accounts in your organization. So it is at times challenging to apply these policies or configurations at scale across all of your accounts. So that was another ask constantly from our customers. Now, to land the challenges better, let's take an example. Let's say I'm an enterprise admin and I have an AWS organization with 500 accounts. And my intent today is to block public access to my VPCs. Prior to declarative policies, there are some challenges in doing this. The first challenge is you will first have to run campaigns across accounts, across business verticals to share your intent of these configuration changes. You have to understand the current configuration of your accounts. Once you do that, you'll have to understand a host of different services and configurations, VPCs, internet gateways attached, subnets, security groups, depending on your configuration. And we all know that it is a bit challenging to have the right configuration in place across all of these different services. Next, once you have the configuration in place, you will have to use an SCP to protect the configuration you put in place. This is an important point. SCPs as such don't define configuration. What SCPs do is protect anyone else from changing the configurations you have put in place. So you will have to write this SCP, you'll have to understand the inheritance logic of SCPs and everything. I've given you an example of the SCP. So it basically denies principals in your organization from attaching an internet gateway or creating a new internet gateway. After you write the SCP and you implement this policy, you will also have to continuously monitor for any changes. With every resource, principle, or action, you'll have to update these policies to make sure that the intent is always maintained. And finally, there was also a challenge from an end customer or a developer standpoint, which is the access denied errors you get from SCPs for people who aren't that close to security wouldn't make a lot of sense. Like if your developers want to debug with the access denied errors, it was a bit challenging. I also want to point out that SCPs are popular for a reason, right? SCPs are super effective for controlling access. These challenges are because we have to use SCPs to kind of maintain the configuration. And let's all agree, this was a lot of work, and for the right reasons, you asked for an easier way to do it, and that is exactly what we did with declarative policies. So with declarative policies, you can declare and enforce configuration of a given AWS service at scale across your organization. This is a new management policy in AWS organization. You can attach it at root, OU, or an account level. This supports delegated administrator, pretty much similar to every other organization policy today. Imagine how easy it's going to be. You don't have to think about individual configurations and services anymore. You don't have to write SCPs to protect your configuration. You don't have to constantly keep updating your policy. We actually are super excited to deliver this, and we think this will be a game changer for customers in terms of managing your configurations at scale across your organization. Okay, so now I'm going to attempt a live demo. Hopefully everything goes well and the demo gods are with us. So I'm going to set up my system, and Tim is going to walk us through the setup, the overview of the demo, while I make sure that all of my sessions are logged in.
All right, good stuff. That was, I think, a pretty exciting announcement that came out this week about declarative policy, and I hope that your wheels are turning about how you would apply that. So as Naveen said, he's going to be doing a great live demo to show you how this works in real life. The objective of this will be to block public access to VPCs in a very specific organizational unit, right? Here's what the organization looks like. So there's a root level, and then there's a dev org with accounts in it, and there is a test org with accounts in it. And what we'll do in the demo is block public access to the VPC in accounts in that dev OU while allowing access to the VPC in the test OU. So this will be a great practical example of the way that declarative policies work.
Perfect. Let's go here. Okay. So this is my organization structure, and I'm logged into the management account of the organization. To the point Tim made, we're going to make sure that we apply the policy to the dev organization. So this member account right here, NavRab member account, will have the impact of the policy. And we're also going to show that the NavRab test member account, which is under the test OU, will have no impact. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to policies. These are the list of policies we support. You will see that we have declarative policies for EC2 over here. I have gone ahead and enabled this policy, but enabling this policy is very similar to how you will do for every other AWS organization. It's simple, just toggle it and it'll get enabled. Okay, now I'm going to go into declarative policies. I've not created any new policy over here, so let's go ahead and create a policy. Our intent over here is to block public access for VPCs. So I'm going to say VPC BPA demo. Okay. Now, if I scroll down, you will see that there is a section for add service attributes, and this is the core of declarative policies. I'm going to click on the drop-down over here. You will see a list of controls that we support today. We are launching with 6 controls across EC2, VPC, and EBS. For the purposes of this demo, we're going to be looking at VPC block public access. I am going to come back to this list and explain the controls though. Just give me like a few minutes, I'll come back. Okay, so let's select VPC block public access. Now, in the drop-down over here, you get to select the state of internet gateway. You can either say block ingress only traffic, or block bidirectional. So let's go block bidirectional over here. One of the biggest benefits of declarative policies is it's a service control plane implementation. So you can have a customized error that you can provide here, and your end developers, when they're calling the API, will actually see the customized error you provide. So let's go ahead and say contact NavRab add for config changes. Okay. Now we're going to create this policy. The policy is created. Let me open this up. Okay. You will notice that this policy is English-like, right? It's intent-based. unlike SCPs, there are no APIs or actions over here. It's the responsibility of the specific service to call the APIs required for making sure that your intent is implemented. Now, in targets, I don't have any OUs or org nodes attached yet. That is intentional. I'm going to show you the behavior in the member account in which I'm going to attach the policy. I'm going to attach the policy to the OU of this member account, and this will have impact. So here, I'm in my VPC. Sorry, I'm in my EC2 console. Let me show you the VPC console over here. So I've gone ahead and provisioned. I ran a stack, CloudFormation stack, to make sure that some of these instances are provisioned over here. So you'll see that there is, let's see if this works. So there is block public access for these two VPCs, and it's turned off at this point. If everything goes well, we attach the policy, and block public access over here in these accounts for the VPC should flip. It should turn on, and I'm going to show you how that works. What I'll also do is I'm going to my VPC. I'm going to connect an instance through the instance connect endpoint. Okay, it's loading up. And I'm going to ping an external IP over here. Okay, so the pings are going through, traffic is flowing at this point. I think the setup is pretty well, where we have traffic flowing in the member account. We haven't attached the policy to in the management account yet. So now I'm going to go back to my management account. Okay, and let's go ahead and attach the policy that we created to the dev OU. Remember, the dev OU has Navara member account, the account I was playing with in the other browser. Okay, I'm now attaching. Now, in the background, organizations is propagating this intent across the different accounts, including the account we were playing with. Let's go to the member account. You will see that the pings are still going through. It takes a few seconds, but in the time being, I want to show you the third account where we did not attach the policy, so there's going to be no impact over here, and you will see that block public access is still turned off in this account, right? Let's give the propagation a bit of time. I'm going to go back to the management account over here, and I want to quickly speak through the different controls while the propagation takes place. So we have an option for you to centrally control serial console access. That's an option for EC2. If you don't want anyone to have serial console access, you can have a declarative policy on that. Number two, you can have a default instance metadata, V2, if preferred, like you can have that across your organization. We are supporting 3 different block public access controls: image block public access, snapshot block public access, and VPC block public access, which is the demo you're doing. And then finally, allowed image settings. This is an interesting one. You can now, using this control, provide a list of trusted AMI providers or Amazon Mission Image providers, and your accounts can only provision from this list you provided. So it's like super impactful. This has been a feature customers have requested, so we think this will really be effective for you all. Okay, now let's go back to the member account and see what's going on here. Okay, so the pinging has stopped, meaning traffic is not going from the account to Amazon.com. And now I'm going to go back to my VPC, and when I refresh, block public access should be on. And block public access is on, so the policy is propagated, so it's right here. That was off earlier, and it's on now. So the policy is propagated across different accounts, and we were successfully able to change block public access, which was off earlier, to on using the declarative policy. And I'll also show you the other account over here. We did not attach the policy, so there'll be no change to the block public access settings over here. Okay, I want to do one last thing in the demo, which is I want to show the command line and basically show you the custom error which we set while creating this policy. So I'll show you, I'm calling get call identity, just to make sure that you all know that I am in my member account right here. This was the account where the policy took effect. Now, let's describe the VPC block public access options. You will see that Internet Gateway is now block bidirectional, which is a setting we had in our policy. And finally, I'm going to call this command, which would basically modify the VPC block public access. So if I do that, if the policy is taken into effect, we should see an error. Great. So we are seeing an error, and you see it says the functionality has been disabled declarative policies, and the custom message also comes through, contact now for any config changes. So this is going to help your developers immensely. Like, they'll be able to contact someone, or you can provide more information on why the action is blocked. We are super excited to have this. This has been a long-standing customer request, so we hope you're all equally excited as we are. Okay, so the demo went well, no internet issues. I'm going to flip back to the PBD, and we will go through. Okay, I'd recorded the demo just in case. Okay, so now that we know how it works, let's look at what happens behind the scenes. So let's imagine we are in the organization management account. We have two OUs, OU1 and OU2, and you are now attaching the declarative policy to OU2, and your intent is to block public access to the VPC for all accounts under OU2. In this example, I've taken block ingress, so ingress only traffic. Now, AWS organizations will make sure that it propagates this policy across every account in the OU. That's the job of AWS organizations. And AWS organization will create an effective policy at every account with the intent you shared in the policy. Then your intent is passed to the respective service. In this case, it is VPC, and it is the role of VPC to make sure that your intent is enforced. It's a key point, so I want to make sure I land this. This is a service control plane level implementation, which provides the flexibility of what we're seeing here. The custom error message and everything you saw, that's because it's a service control plane level implementation. Okay, so now that we saw how to set it up, we know how the policy works behind the scenes, you may all have a very fair question, like, when do you use declarative policies? And our recommendation is, if your intent is supported, if your intent is one of the 6 controls we're launching with, we highly, highly recommend that you use declarative policies. It's because it's super easy to set up. You folks saw it's like an English-like policy. Like, you don't have to worry about APIs or actions. So easy to set up. Number 2, once you set it, it is always enforced. It is a role of AWS organizations to propagate this policy, and it is the role of VPC to enforce the policy. And finally, everyone loves the transparent feedback mechanism. Like, customers really you want to inform your developers on what action is actually blocked and why it's blocked, and you can do that using the feedback mechanism, the customer error messages over here. Okay, so that is declarative policy. I'm going to now speak about resource control policy, but as we do that, I want to start off with a quiz. Are you folks ready? Let's go. So let's imagine we have Org Vegas. You are admin of Org Vegas, and you have an S3 bucket in an account in Org Vegas. Your organization also has Org Seattle, and there are users in Org Seattle. Okay? Your intent as admin is to make sure that users in Org Seattle cannot access the S3 bucket in Org Vegas. My question is, can you do that using an SCP in Org Vegas? If your answer is yes, raise your hands. Okay. If your answer is no, raise your hands. Okay. If you said no, you were right. That's because the scope of the SCP is the organization. You cannot control external users using the SCP. So then there's a fair question. How do you all do it today? You do it using resource-based policies. I've given you an example of the resource-based policy on the right. It basically is a deny policy where you deny action to wildcard S3s or specific actions in S3s. And you basically use a condition key to say that principals outside my org are not allowed to access resources in my org. Doing this comes with some challenges. there is no central mechanism. Like you will have to do this across all accounts today, all resources, which takes time and effort. Next, you'll have to continuously monitor these policies. And I want to call upon like an important principle we call separation of duties. So resource-based policies are normally used to grant access to users, and you are using the resource-based policy here to basically deny access, meaning you'll have to constantly monitor the changes that happens in resource-based policies and ensure that your principals at an account level don't make these changes. So that requires continuous monitoring. And whenever there is a need for continuous monitoring, it impacts pace of innovation. Like to the point I made, you will have to have guardrails in place and processes in place to make sure that your principals don't or your developers don't make changes to RBPs, resource-based policies. So that kind of impacts the pace of innovation. This was challenging, but resource control policies solves for this because now you can centrally define and enforce consistent access control across your organization at scale. This is an authorization policy. It joins service control policies. What service control policies did for principals, resource control policies do for resources. Very similar to every other organization policy, you can attach this to the root, OU, or an account level, and this also supports delegated administrator. Okay, so what are the key benefits of resource-based policies? As I kind of spoke about earlier, you can now centrally define and enforce these controls at an organization level. You don't have to spend time at an account level, which is super critical. Second, it's a very powerful preventative control. I want to land this point here. Like, irrespective of the number of accounts you folks have, and irrespective of the number of people who are actually editing policies, you can now easily and quickly say, no external user is going to access my data. And we think that is super powerful, and we are stoked to have this available for all of you. And finally, you can also empower your developer teams to innovate faster because the need for constantly monitoring resource-based policies is removed with resource control policies. Great. If you're interested in diving into resource control policies further, I would highly encourage that you go attend SEC 337 and happening December 4th, December 5th, and SEC 307 happening December 5th. Our identity peers will be diving into resource control policies in these sessions, so I highly encourage that you go attend it. Okay, so when I speak to customers, there is a constant question of, oh, we've had SCPs for a while. We have launched declarative policies now, and we have resource control policies. There's a question on when to use which policy among customers. So I want to make sure that I clarify that with you all. Let's start with when you would use any of these policies. So if your intent is to have controls on access, then you would be using an authorization policy. We have service control policy and resource control policy, the two authorization policies. The key difference is if you want to put controls on principals, then you would use service control policy. And if you want to put control on resources, you would use resource control policy. The key difference is with declarative policies is that you can enforce default configurations or baseline configuration across services using declarative policies. Number two, we actually implement this, or the controlling happens at an API level for both service control policies and resource control policies. So it is your responsibility to make sure that you deny actions at an API level, and you compare that to declarative policies. This is not API level. You share your intent in the policy. AWS organization makes sure that we propagate the policy to the service, and the service would make sure that they would implement this policy. So it's more intent-based. And a few other differences over here. Service control policies and resource control policies are IAM auth level implementation compared to declarative policies that are service control plane level implementation. To the point I made earlier, this provides us some flexibility in terms of the feedback to your end users. You can customize your feedback error messages in declarative policies. In SCPs and RCPs, because the implementation happens in the IAM level, you will still get the access denied error for your end customers. Finally, leaving you folks with an example, if you want to deny access to unapproved regions, that is a control you want to put on your principals. So you would use a SCP, a service control policy, for doing something like that. Now, if you want to ensure that only trusted identities access your resource, that is a permission control you're putting on your resource. So you should be using a resource control policy to do that. And finally, if you want to have some configuration, the example we saw, the demo we saw, block public access on VPCs or AMIs or snapshots, then now you have a new policy, declarative policy, and we highly encourage that you use that. This is the table if you folks want to take a picture. We've also captured this in our documentation, so you can also go there and refer to it. Great. Now, I'll invite Tim back. He's going to speak to you about developments in CloudTrail.
All right, thanks, Naveen. Pretty exciting stuff. Like I'm still processing the fact that we've basically tripled the number of control policy types that you can use in these situations. I think it's pretty exciting that we rolled both of these out fairly recently. Declarative policies this week and resource control policies earlier this fall. So how about a silent round of applause for these for these new releases? I had to have a little bit of fun with the silent show. So we're going to pivot for a few minutes and talk a little bit about governance in context of some of our observability capabilities. And again, in the theme of this session, something new in observability that's going to help implement and manage sound governance. So how many here are familiar with or regular users of CloudTrail? I would expect majority of the room would be the case. So we're going to run quickly through CloudTrail, how you use it for governance, and something new there and some examples. So CloudTrail, as you know, can be used for operational auditing. Near and dear to our hearts is risk auditing, and then using the data that comes out of CloudTrail to help enable sound governance and continuously improve it. So how do we use it to enable governance? First thing that we want to call out is that for the events or the resource types that you have CloudTrail turned on in, you have a record of every API call made amongst those resources. Deep level of visibility and data. You can use that to conduct audits. Think back to what we talked about earlier with compliance requirements. And one of the neat things about CloudTrail 2 as a sidebar is it does integrate with our audit manager service that would allow an automatic compliance check in reporting, saving your teams quite a bit of time, right? Third, you can use this to really see what your users are doing. Who's doing what are they doing, where are they doing it, right? Deep level of visibility. And then lastly, you can detect what we might call anomalous activities, right? A really rapid movement of a large amount of data or a huge volume of maybe denied access requests. Those sorts of things would show up in your CloudTrail events. And we want to use all of that intelligence to help inform our policies, right? So if you're a CloudTrail user, you know that historically we've had a couple of different what we call event types in CloudTrail. The first is the default setting in CloudTrail. If you turn it on, you have this, and it's called a management event, right? These are the events and operations that take place on the resources within your environment, right? Also known as control plane operations. It is the default setting. Examples might be create an S3 bucket, right? Or register some devices, or maybe even change some configuration of some routing tables. So those are operations on your resources. The second type we've had are data events, right? So this is about operations on the data within those resources or data plane operations. This is an optional event type, but again, when you think about richness of data and visibility, it's something you might want to consider if you're not already doing that. Examples of that might be the object in that S3 bucket that you created. What's happening with that object or those objects? Amazon secure notification service operations. How is that being used, right? And then think about Lambda function activity as well. These are all things that can be logged as data events. But there was a gap, and in the theme again of introducing new things, we were glad to announce in September a preview launch of a new event type in CloudTrail that's known as network activity events. So we had our management events, we have our data events, And now we have network activity events. And this is kind of exciting because now for the first time you have that granular visibility into activity that's taking place traversing your API, your VPC endpoints. So all of that traffic between those endpoints is captured. So again, it's in preview for 4 services right now: CloudTrail itself, EC2, Secrets Manager, and Key Management Service. Stay tuned as that's expanded into some other services. So let's just spend one quick minute on what a VPC endpoint is. Itself is an enabler of security, right? So if you're familiar with it, you know that this is a virtual device within your VPC that allows you to connect to AWS services, other service endpoints, and it keeps, this is the key piece, it keeps the traffic within your VPC so that you don't need to go outside of that into the public internet for this traffic, right? So a really important and valuable tool from a security perspective. And typically these are governed and controlled in the way that Naveen described with these control policy types. There's really not much difference there, but there sometimes is a need to have an even more granular level of policy control in these VPC endpoints. And to do that, we have something called VPC endpoint policies, right? These are resource-based policies that ultimately control the access that your principals have to those VPC endpoints and what they can do there. They don't override the other policies. Think of them more as an exception to those policies in specific use cases. And they don't cover all of the services, but they will cover the key services that you need to be able to have these controls. The default setting for these is full access. So of course, you will want to, if you're using a VPC endpoint policy, go in and modify it to meet your specific business objective. I'm going to share, so this is an example here of a VPC endpoint policy that only allows trusted principals to make requests from my VPCs, right? It's by design and by definition, according to best practice, very restrictive in its nature, right? We want to start restrictive and expand if necessary. If you look at that QR code, that is the full context of that policy if you're interested in studying that and using it yourself. But what if that policy is too strict? Or what if you have a use case or a scenario where you would like to have some exceptions made? This is where your use of the new network activity event in CloudTrail comes in. So let's think of a scenario where perhaps you have a security vendor that has come in and your segregated security team is working with them to do maybe an investigation or an assessment of something in your VPCs, and they want to have access to certain VPC endpoints. Well, they're going to be denied when they try to access those, right? And you're going to see those denials in your network activity events in CloudTrail. That visibility will help you determine which VPC endpoints to give specific access to for specific principals from perhaps that security vendor that you're working with. So again, using network activity events to have that visibility in order to guide an updated policy. You can also continue to use that network activity event visibility to monitor perhaps what that security vendor is doing. And you would probably have a time-limited execution of that policy, and you can use that network activity event to look at that, to make sure that that was shut off and the activity is no longer being executed. So it's a use case of using that visibility, a new level of visibility, to give you more granular access and control over what's happening in your VPC endpoints. And again, our theme here today is what's new in governance? How can we enhance your ability to govern and control your environments more effectively? And do so according to some of those missional capabilities that we talked about, right? Enabling balance of innovation and control, and allowing granular access or control. So as we kind of wrap up our time here, a couple final thoughts. I hope that you've been thinking of scenarios in your own worlds to apply these new capabilities and thinking about maybe a year from now being on stage with us to tell a success story using these policies. We'd love to hear it. So quick summary of the 3 launches. We think declarative policies, which was just launched this week, is really a game changer, allowing you to declare that desired configuration from the resource perspective is a huge change. Same with resource control policies, being able to centrally define and enforce that consistent access control. And then finally, what I just went over, network activity events that give you a whole new level of visibility as to what's happening in your VPCs via CloudTrail. So really exciting stuff, thrilled that you're here. Naveen shared a couple of very specific sessions earlier related to those new control policy types. There's also several others here that we would encourage you to look into. That talk more deep dive about different aspects of applying governance and extends excuse me, some of these concepts a little bit further. Of course, if you can't get to them or if you miss them, they always will be recorded and available on YouTube at some point in the future. Hand it to Naveen to wrap us up.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Exciting stuff in CloudTrail. Hopefully you're all excited too. So I want to reiterate myself, if you have a multi-account environment and you have an intent to govern across your multiple accounts, then we highly encourage that you use one of these services. On the left, you'll see a getting started for organizations, and on the right, you see a getting started for Control Tower. We were super excited to deliver all of these features. The team has been working hard for these, so we'd love for you to jump on, try it, and get back with feedback. We'd love to interact with you. So if you have any questions, reach out to us. Always available to answer your questions. That's our session today. I want to remind you all of the survey. If you found this session helpful, interesting, remember to please take the survey. We take your feedback super seriously, so it'll be helpful. Thank you. Thanks for your time.